8 hours. That's how long I drove through the tail end of Hurricane Ida's cousin. They were calling it a tropical depression by then, but nobody told the rain that. It came down in sheets the whole way from Knoxville to Charlotte. The kind of rain where your wipers can't keep up and you just trust the white lines and pray. I'm 64 years old. I have a bad knee, a lower back that's been arguing with me since 2019, and a cardiologist who told me last spring to avoid unnecessary stress. I mention all of this because it matters. Because when you do something difficult for someone you love, the difficulty is the point. It's how you show them the math of what they mean to you. My son's name is Caleb. He turned 40 that October. His wife is Diane and they have 2 kids, a boy named Cooper and a girl named June, who was 5 at the time and still had that gap-toothed smile that could make me forget anything bad that ever happened. I hadn't seen them in 7 months. The visit kept getting pushed. Something with Caleb's job, something with the kid's schedule, something with Diane's sister visiting. There was always a something, but I told myself that's just how life gets when people are busy and raising a family. I told myself I understood. For his birthday, I decided to surprise him. I'd been planning it quietly for 3 weeks, coordinating with his neighbor Linda, who had a spare key and agreed to let me in so I could set up before they got back from dinner. I'd packed a cooler with his favorite things, smoked brisket from Malone's in Knoxville, 2 bottles of the bourbon he liked but never bought for himself, a tin of the shortbread cookies I made every year since he was a kid. I wrapped his gift, a restored vintage Gibson acoustic I'd found at an estate sale, and had professionally set up. The kind of guitar he used to talk about wanting back in college, before he decided guitars didn't pay the rent. I left at 6 in the morning. The rain started around Asheville and didn't stop. By the time I pulled onto his street in South Charlotte, it was just past 2 in the afternoon. Their house was a nice colonial cream siding with dark shutters. They'd bought it 4 years ago with help that I'm not going to get into just yet, but I will. Linda had texted me that Caleb and Diane weren't leaving for dinner until 6, so I had time. I let myself in, got the cooler set up in the kitchen, arranged everything the way I used to do for his birthday when he was young. Brisket on a cutting board, candles on the counter, the guitar leaning against the wall with a bow on it. I was tired from the drive. My knee was stiff. I sat down in the armchair in the living room to rest for a few minutes. That's when I heard them come in through the garage. I hadn't heard a car. My hearing isn't what it was. They must have come back early. Diane had mentioned something to Caleb about June having a stomachache. I heard little June's voice first, then Caleb's. I was about to stand up, about to call out, "Hey, surprise," when Diane's voice stopped me cold. "I just don't want to deal with him tonight," she said. Her voice was tired, but it wasn't the kind of tired that apologizes for itself. Caleb said something low that I couldn't make out. I know," she said, "but every time he comes, it's like, I don't know. The whole house changes. The kids get wound up and then you're in a mood for 3 days after and I'm the one managing all of it." "It's just one night," Caleb said. "It's never just one night with your dad. He has opinions about everything. How we're raising the kids, how you're spending money, how I cook. He doesn't say that stuff. He implies it, Caleb. There's a difference." A pause. "And honestly, the money thing is getting old. Like, yes, he helped us. He's helped us a lot. But I'm so tired of feeling like we owe him something every time he walks in the door. It's like he carries a ledger." Silence. "You don't think that?" she asked. I heard my son exhale. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "Yeah, sometimes I do." I sat in that armchair and I did not move. Through the archway I could see part of the kitchen, the cutting board, the brisket, one of the bourbon bottles. 8 hours of rain, a bad knee, a guitar with a bow on it. "I just wish," Diane continued, and her voice had gone softer now, almost gentle in the way that made it worse. "I just wish he'd find something else to fill his time, his own life, so he didn't have to be his whole life. It's a lot of pressure." Caleb didn't answer that one. I stood up slowly. Quietly. I took my jacket from the arm of the chair. I walked to the kitchen, and I picked up my car keys from the counter where I'd set them next to the bourbon. I looked at the guitar against the wall for a moment. Then I walked out the front door and pulled it closed behind me without a sound. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I sat in my car for a long time with the engine off. Long enough that the windows fogged. I kept thinking about what Diane had said, that I carry a ledger. I thought about that for a while. I thought about whether it was true. I thought about the down payment 6 years ago when Caleb and Diane were renting a 2-bedroom apartment and talking about how they'd never be able to afford a house in Charlotte. I wrote them a check for $42,000. I didn't call it a loan. I didn't write up any paperwork. I just gave it to them because they were my son and his wife and I wanted them to have a home. I thought about the car. Diane's Highlander needed a new transmission 2 years ago. $11,000. I covered it because Caleb called me on a Tuesday sounding like the world was ending, and I didn't want the world to end for him. I thought about Cooper's private school tuition for the past 3 years. $900 a month. Every month. Because Caleb said the public school in their district wasn't great and I said I'd help. I started the car and I drove home. All 8 hours back through the dark and the drizzle, back to Knoxville, back to the house that Caleb had grown up in, that had apparently become the symbol of a man with no life of his own. I didn't call them that night, or the next day. When Caleb texted on Thursday, "Hey Dad, everything okay? Haven't heard from you." I waited several hours before I replied, "All good, just resting up. Talk soon." I needed to think before I did anything. That had always been my nature. I'd spent 31 years running a commercial heating and cooling company. You don't survive that long in business by reacting. You survive by measuring twice. So I measured. I called my attorney, a woman named Carol Whitfield, who I'd worked with for 12 years. I told her I needed to update my estate documents. She asked if something had happened. I said yes. She didn't push further, which is one of the reasons I've kept her around. We met on a Friday morning. I walked her through what I wanted, my will, previously leaving everything to Caleb with provisions for the grandchildren needed to be restructured. My primary beneficiary would now be the Appalachian Animal Rescue Network, an organization up in Knoxville I've been donating to for years. There would be a separate educational trust for Cooper and June, managed by Carol's office, dispersed for school expenses only and only until they turned 22. Caleb and Diane would receive nothing. Carol looked at me over her glasses for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and said, "All right, let's do this right." The automatic bank transfers were next. I had a standing transfer of $900 going to Cooper's school, set up directly with the institution. I called the school's business office and canceled it the following Monday, effective the end of that billing cycle. I also removed Caleb as the secondary account holder on my savings account, something I'd added him 2 years ago for convenience. I left the monthly transfers alone for a while. I wanted to see how long it took them to notice I had gone quiet. 3 weeks passed. No call asking why I hadn't visited. No checking in. One text from Caleb about a football game. One from Diane about a photo of the kids at Halloween. Normal surface-level contact that could have been with anyone. Then the school sent a notice. Caleb called on a Tuesday morning, his voice confused in that particular way people sound when the ground shifts under them without warning. "Hey Dad, I got a weird message from Cooper's school. They're saying his tuition is past due." "That's right," I said. A pause. "Did something happen with the bank? The autopay didn't go through?" "I canceled it." Another pause, longer this time. "You, what, why?" "I've been doing some reorganizing," I said. "Going over my finances, making some changes." "Okay." I could hear him trying to stay calm. Can we talk about this? $900 a month is a lot for us to just pick up out of nowhere." "I understand," I said, "but it was always your expense, Caleb. I was just helping." He didn't have much to say to that. We got off the phone a few minutes later, politely, the way people do when they're saying goodbye to a conversation they aren't ready to have yet. The next call came 4 days later. This time it was about the Highlander's insurance. I had added Diane's vehicle to my commercial policy years ago as a favor. It saved them several $100s a year. I had removed it quietly when I'd done the other paperwork. "Dad, Diane's getting renewal notices and the rate has gone up $400. "She'll need her own policy," I said. "I took it off mine." Why is all of this happening at once? It was always going to happen eventually, I said. I should have separated these things sooner. It was too tangled. Too tangled? His voice had an edge now. Dad, are you punishing us for something? Because I feel like I'm missing something. You might be, I said quietly. And I let him sit with that. I didn't hear from him for 9 days after that. When he called again, Diane was on the line too. I could tell by the quality of the silence around his voice. Someone nearby, listening. Dad, we need to talk about what's going on. Diane and I both want to understand. If we did something to upset you, we want to know what it was. I appreciate that, I said. So, what was it? I paused. Come up to Knoxville, I said. I'll make dinner. We can talk face to face. There was a muffled exchange. When? Saturday, I said. Whenever you can get here. They arrived at 3 in the afternoon. They left the kids with Diane's mother, which I understood. This wasn't going to be that kind of visit. I watched them pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. They sat in the car for about 4 minutes before getting out. Whatever they were saying to each other, I hoped they were being honest. I met them at the door. The house was warm. I had coffee ready and enough food for a real meal. Because whatever was about to happen, I wasn't going to be inhospitable. My parents raised me a certain way. Diane looked tired but composed. Caleb looked like a man who had spent 2 weeks bracing for something and wasn't sure if the impact had come yet. We made small talk through coffee. Then I set down my mug and I said, "Do you want me to tell you what happened or would you like to guess?" They looked at each other. "Tell us," Caleb said. I looked at my son. "Do you remember that I was going to surprise you for your birthday, October 14th? Something shifted in his face. Not recognition, exactly. More like the beginning of recognition, the first second of it. You came?" "I came," I said. 8 hours from Knoxville. Rain the whole way. Linda let me in. I had food, I had bourbon, I had a guitar for you. I paused. I was sitting in the living room waiting when you came home early. The silence that followed was absolute. Diane's face had gone very still. "I heard the conversation," I said. "You were in the hallway. The ledger comment. The part about me needing to find my own life. The part about how the whole house changes when I'm there." I looked at my son. "And I heard your answer, Caleb." He opened his mouth and then closed it. "I'm not angry," I said, and that was the truth. I'd had 2 weeks to move past anger into something colder and much more stable. But I want you to understand that what I heard that afternoon is why the school payment stopped, and why the insurance changed, and why I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I've built and where it goes." Diane said carefully, "You recorded us?" "No. I didn't need to. I remember it clearly." She looked at her hands. "I want to ask you something," I said to both of them. "And I want you to think before you answer. Not what sounds right, what's actually true." I looked at Caleb. "Did you mean what you said?" "About the ledger. My son is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because what I'm telling you could make him sound like one. And it's more complicated than that." He looked at me for a long time, and I could see him deciding whether to give me the diplomatic answer or the true one. He gave me the true one. "Sometimes it feels like everything you give comes with a weight," he said. "Not a condition. I know you never said it had to be paid back, but it's heavy. You know? Like I can never just be your son. I'm also always your recipient, and I don't know how to separate those things." I sat with that for a moment. "I never wanted you to feel that way," I said. "But I also need you to know that what I gave freely. There was no ledger. There's a difference between giving freely and being told to go find your own life." He nodded. He looked like he was trying not to cry, which made 2 of us. Diane said, "I'm sorry. What I said was unfair and it was unkind. I didn't know you were there, but that doesn't change what I meant." That surprised me. It was the most straightforward thing she'd ever said to me in 15 years. "I appreciate that," I said. We had dinner. We talked, really talked, the first time in years that I felt like we were actually in the same room rather than performing being in the same room. They drove home that night. The kids were fine. Nothing was fixed, but something was true that hadn't been true before. What I didn't tell them at dinner was the rest. The will had already been changed. Carol had filed everything in November. The trust for Cooper and June was real and intact. But the larger estate, the house, the retirement accounts, the investments from when I'd sold the business, that was going to the rescue network now unless I chose to change it again, which I had not yet decided. I also didn't tell them that the guitar was still in my car. I had driven it back to Knoxville and it had been sitting in my back seat for 2 weeks, still wrapped, bow slightly crushed. I brought it inside the week after their visit and put it in my office. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. In February, Caleb called me on a Sunday. Not about money, not about a bill, just to talk. He asked about my knee. He asked about the dog I'd mentioned getting. He asked about the dog I'd mentioned getting. He asked if I'd watched the game the night before. It was a 20-minute phone call about nothing in particular, which was the first one of those we'd had in years. Diane sent me a card for my birthday in March. A real one, handwritten, which is not nothing in a world where people text. She wrote that the conversation in October had stayed with her, that she'd been thinking about the difference between what she said and what she meant to say, and that she wasn't sure they were the same thing. I read that card a few times. Then I put it in my desk drawer next to the photo of Caleb at 6 years old, holding a fish he'd caught at Norris Lake. Proudest face you ever saw. I drive up to see them once a month now. Not every week, once a month. I stay 2 nights, and then I come home. The kids are still the kids. Cooper's in a phase where he explains everything like I'm slightly dim, and June has decided I'm her personal jungle gym, which I allow because she's 5 and I won't always be able to carry her, and I know it. Caleb and I are different with each other now, less careful in a way. Like we stopped pretending the conversation in October never happened and started just building something that accounts for it. That's not nothing either. The guitar's in my office still. I got it restrung last month. Sometimes in the evenings I play it myself. Just chords I half remember from when I was young and thought I had time to learn things. Maybe I'll give it to Cooper someday when his hands are big enough. Maybe I'll keep it. I haven't decided yet. The estate documents, as of this spring, still name the rescue network as primary beneficiary. I think about changing that sometimes. I think I probably will, eventually. But not yet. There's something about knowing the thing you built could go somewhere that has nothing to do with obligation. Somewhere that asks nothing in return, that wags its tail when it sees you regardless, that I'm not ready to give up. My cardiologist says my stress numbers are down. I don't know if that's because of anything I did or just because spring came and the light got better. But I drive up to Charlotte with a lighter feeling now than I did before October. Like something that was tangled for a long time has been sorted out enough to move through. It's not a happy ending, but it might be an honest one, and I'll take honest. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to Tender Revenge. Leave a comment below and tell me, has someone in your life ever made you feel like a ledger instead of a person? I'd like to hear from you. To hear the next story, click the box on the screen now. I've been thinking about what it costs to find out the truth about something you loved. Not the financial cost, though that was real enough. $42,000 for a down payment. $11,000 for a transmission. $900 a month for 3 years of school tuition. Those numbers don't lie and they don't change. But the cost I mean is the other kind. The kind you pay in the quiet of a car with fogged windows while the rain comes down, and you try to figure out what you actually believed versus what you only hoped was true. What I believed was that I had given freely, and I had. No paperwork, no conditions, no conversations about repayment. I gave because Caleb was my son, and because I had the means, and because watching someone you love struggle when you could stop it. That's not something I was built to do. I don't regret any of it. I want to say that plainly, because it matters. I don't regret a dollar. What I learned, sitting in that armchair while Diane's voice came through the archway, is that generosity and gratitude operate on separate tracks. You can give without condition and still be received with resentment. The gift and the weight of the gift are 2 different things, and I had spent years thinking only about one of them. That's on me. I should have seen it sooner, but here's what I've also come to understand. The moment you discover that something you built has been taken for granted is not the moment to burn it down. I know that's what people want from these stories. They want the full reckoning, the scorched earth, the satisfaction of watching someone get exactly what they deserve. I understand that impulse. I felt it too, driving home in the dark, doing the math in my head. What I chose instead was something harder and, I think, more honest. I stopped. I separated what was mine from what had become tangled up in other people's expectations. I changed the documents that needed changing. I removed the supports that had become invisible to the people leaning on them. And then I waited to see what would happen when the weight became real. What happened was that Caleb told me the truth, a hard truth, an uncomfortable one, that my giving had made him feel like a debtor even when I never meant it that way. That's not nothing. That took something out of him to say, and it told me more about his character than 15 years of easy gratitude would have. Diane apologized without being asked, simply and directly, which I did not expect. I'm not sure I've fully forgiven either of them. Forgiveness isn't a switch, but I know the difference now between what our relationship was, performance, obligation, the careful maintenance of a surface, and what it has the chance to become. That difference is worth something. The will still names the rescue network. I think about changing it. I haven't yet. There's a kind of clarity in knowing that what you've built doesn't have to go to the people who expected it. It can go somewhere that asks nothing, expects nothing, and still finds a reason to be glad you showed up. That's not revenge. That's just finally understanding what your life is actually for.